Good morning. This is David Winstead and the program In the Know on Channel 16. Welcome. I'm glad you could join us. We have a wonderful guest this morning, Senator Jeffrey Waldstreicher, who's our senator in District 18. And District 18, fortunately, has 8 of the 18 municipalities in Montgomery County, correct?
That's right.
So you're our leader.
Well, thank you for saying that, and thank you for having me today.
It's great to take time. Thank you for taking the time. I know you've had a very active 90 days or whatever it's been in Annapolis, and we really do appreciate your leadership down there. I think all the residents of the county and of District 18 appreciate what you do. I know one of the issues that was on your minds, on everybody's mind now, is the impact that the new administration's had on federal employees. Happened years ago. I was in charge of federal buildings for a U.S. Senator and know the issues of federal tenancy and people occupying them and doing their work and that kind of thing. We've certainly seen a lot of changes over the last 90 days or so. Can you tell me how that issue was dealt with in the legislature to try to help some of the federal employees that have been dislocated or DOJ had fired them, and what the state and the legislature did this session in that regard?
Absolutely. Well, let me start with this. Federal employees are patriots. They serve with valor. All the federal employees that I know could be making a lot more money in the private sector, but they choose to work for the government because they believe in public service. They believe in the dignity of what they are doing. And it's such important work in the sciences, in administration, in the military. And so my job as a state legislator is to stand by their side and protect our federal workers. And fortunately, our entire legislature believes the same. So we passed a major piece of legislation called the Federal Workers Protection Act. And what this is a series of policies to make sure that we are helping those who have been targeted by the Trump administration, who have been targeted by DOJ. As you know, this targeting has been haphazard. And in many ways, it's been incredibly cruel. And of course, with the Trump administration, cruelty is usually much of the point. What the bill does is it sets aside money for assistance for federal employees who have been laid off. So of course, we have our traditional unemployment system, but sometimes federal workers need other assistance, including job finding assistance, cash assistance, and other resources that state government can provide. And so we really joined together. It was a bipartisan bill. Many Republicans voted for the bill, and I'm really proud of what we were able to put together.
And Jeff, how did it target? So I would assume there is some federal money, even if I know that they first were talking about probationary employees, which would be shorter term. But was there also federal aid that came in as they got dismissed from their jobs, or were they were just fired?
Well, so it just depends on the agency, and it just depends, unfortunately, on the whim of this president. Some of our federal employees have agencies that treated them with respect, got a year of severance. That is generous. Some people showed up to work on a Friday, and their key cards didn't work, and now they have no income, no way to pay their mortgage, no way to put food on the table. And so this ridiculousness, this silliness, this has real world consequences for my constituents and throughout Montgomery County. And now the state government has a central landing page, a web page for federal employees to go to get resources. And then we back that web page with real dollars to make sure that people aren't going without food, that people can make sure that they pay their mortgage or rent that month.
Well, that's great. You know, when you look at this issue of what DOJ is doing across the board, and you also look at its impact on Montgomery County, you know, with the FDA, with the NIH, with the National Cancer Institute, we're not dealing with agencies that are unimportant, right? One is in advance of food and drugs, one is in advance of cancer treatment, one's in advance of health. I mean, the NIH caucuses health leaders from around the world in terms of what to do with crises. So I think it'd be of interest to people. What's the sense of you all on the state level talking about this, but also Van Holland and the congressional opinion? What's your sense of the impact on like those major economic engines of those federal agencies in Montgomery County. Was there much discussion of that?
There was a lot of discussion. The biggest sense is one of anger. NIH and all these incredible agencies that we have here in Montgomery County and throughout the DC region are the envy of the world.
Right.
China wishes they had what we have. European countries wish that they had what we have. There is waste, fraud, and abuse in our federal government. There's no question about it. And as a Democrat, I believe we should fight against waste, fraud, and abuse. Right. But we should do it with thought and nuance. And most of that occurs not in our premier agencies, not in NIH, not in USAID. These are agencies filled with scientists and PhDs and Nobel laureates. It makes no sense from a national perspective or from a local perspective to gut these critical agencies. And so that's what's been hard to watch, because it feels un-American. It is un-American. And so that's why the state government has chosen to step up and fight back.
And work closely with the congressional delegation, correct?
That's right.
Because they're
Chris Van Hollen, Jamie Raskin, Angela Alsobrooks, these have been incredible allies in our fight to push back against the Trump administration.
Right. The flip side of that, just to talk a little bit about economic impact, you know, there are lots of states, lots of counties that would love to have what Montgomery County has in terms of these agencies. I know that, you know, they're on a federal mission at NIH, FDA, whatever. But what's your sense of how the state has handled the objective of leveraging these agencies for economic development to attract more? I know the Governor Moore this session had several initiatives that were targeted at economic development, right? Growing business, making it easier for business to exist. What's your sense of the focus and opportunities looking at what Montgomery has and the kinds of businesses that should be here because of them?
I think that's a great question. So I actually think Montgomery County and Maryland does a great job of leveraging our public agencies to build private development around those agencies. And so in Montgomery County, we have a lot of biotech and pharmaceutical because FDA is here, because NIH is here. Where Montgomery County and Maryland do less well is attracting other sources of private investment, sometimes private investment that doesn't deal directly with those agencies. We're competing, obviously, with Virginia across the river, which does a great job with that. But increasingly, we're competing with other states that aren't our neighbors, North Carolina, Massachusetts, Arizona even, Texas. And so we need to do a better job in Montgomery County attracting that private investment. And let me tell you, I know I'm a little more partisan today than I usually am, but let me tell you why I support this as a Democrat and as a progressive. As someone who believes in the ability of government to protect the most vulnerable, that relies on taxes. That relies on income that we get from people who are here to pay taxes. And if you lose the opportunity to have businesses here that are paying those taxes, then we lose the opportunity to protect our most vulnerable. So economic development is really important because of the jobs that it provides to our residents. But economic development as a progressive, as a Democrat, is really crucial to me because it provides the resources that we need to help fund our schools, to help fund hunger relief, to help provide housing aid. And that's why Montgomery County needs to do a better job of economic development.
Right. Senator, you know, the shock that has occurred in the commercial real estate industry from COVID, where everybody was staying at home for health reasons, to them migrating back to the workplace. I mean, under President Biden, federal employees were required to be in their workspace 1.5 days a week. That's been upped under the Trump administration. I know that they are going back to downtown office space. But one of the impacts that really has to be monitored is the fact that occupancy of these office buildings in Montgomery County is way down because of with the reality of telework. I mean, COVID did prove that people can effectively work from home online, and you know, it really did wake up a lot of people and teach them how to work more remotely. But the impact of that is that these office buildings in Montgomery County are much more vacant than they were. The occupancy is 22% on average, I believe. It could be even worse. 20% vacancy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what's your sense of that? Did that come up at all in terms of the debate of the state budget and the revenues from property tax and concerns there? Was that an issue that came up this session at all?
It does come up. And the answer is not to spend years or decades trying to bring in new businesses to fill that vacant space. I mean, we should be attracting new businesses, but the most important thing we can do in the short term is convert. Our residential housing prices are so high, and the reason for that is very simple. Scarcity. Right. And so converting commercial space to residential space is the most important thing we can do to rebuild our tax base here in Montgomery County, to lower housing costs by increasing capacity, and just to make our urban areas, Silver Spring, Bethesda, more lively by getting more people in there. And so we've taken some leadership role at the state level to help ease the conversion of commercial buildings into residential buildings. Mm-hmm. And then just recently, the county council, under the leadership of Councilmember Friedson, has done their layer of government to make that a faster and less expensive proposition. So I think we're moving in the right direction.
Oh, good.
Yep.
Good. So, but the conversion to residential will meet, hopefully, affordable housing objectives. Mm-hmm. Just for a few minutes, we got to take a break here, but in the legislature on affordable housing, which if you are converting commercial office to more residential, what was the discussion, or were there additional incentives provided specifically for more affordable housing in Montgomery County? Was that?
Yes, there were.
Okay.
And we have to make sure we're providing the resources, and we are doing that at the state level. But what we've also tried to do at the state level, but also need help on at the county level, is costs aren't everything. Speed is part of the equation.
In terms of approval?
Speed in terms of approval, in terms of permit. Exactly, that's right. Market conditions.
And I recall that the Maryland home builders were very pleased at an initiative. And did it get past this session where there's a mandate to speed up the approvals of the state agencies involved in housing?
So we have done that at the state level, but there was legislation that the governor put in that would make it faster at the county level. Okay. That, as you and I both know, was actually not passed, to my disappointment and to the disappointment of the governor. Okay. And so, I think that was an unfortunate fail during the session. I think we'll need to come back and take a look at that again.
Right, because that's a huge part of the solution, is making it easier for home builders to come in, take advantage of the financial aid for more affordable housing units within redevelopment. And as you say, the fact that a lot of these urban buildings that were traditionally office, the occupancy makes it very difficult to carry them. I mean, a lot of these buildings have lost all the equity in them because of the occupancy being very down. But
that's right. And just to use your words, you talk about the home builders or the developers. I'm not pro home builder. Right. I'm not pro developer, but I am pro having young families in our community. I am pro affordable housing. Right. And you need to have the private market working to make that happen. And so if we want new people in our county, we have to attract the housing developers and providers that can make that housing for us.
Great. Well, Senator, we're going to take a quick break and then talk a little bit about the excellence in public schools that got passed. But this is David Winstead. I'm here with Senator Jeffrey Waldstreicher, and we'll be back after this break.
My baby's back from the West Coast.
Here are those pictures that you asked for your school project? First day of school, cute as a button.
So long ago.
Oh, here's Grandma Florence after that flood wiped out the whole neighborhood.
Sometimes I just cannot believe all the storms we've gone through here.
I can only hope that we'll be able to leave this house to you one day, baby. You're our legacy.
Planning for these disasters will make sure we're safe, and is the best way to protect that legacy.
Those beans smell heavenly.
Give Mom a little
You
credit.
know what? We should make an emergency communication plan. That way we're ready this year.
Oh, thank you.
At my dorm, we have emergency kits for earthquakes and wildfires, but I'm sure there's something more local I can send you with the link.
Okay.
Smart.
I'm coming to share with you guys.
Protect your legacy. Plan for natural disasters today. Visit ready.gov/plan.
Welcome back. I'm David Winstead, and this is the program In the Know on Montgomery Municipal Cable. And we have one of our top leaders in the Maryland legislature with us. Jeffrey, thank you for being with us again. We were talking before about a lot of the economic development issues and some of the federal employee issues, but there was a lot of initiative this session on public schools and excellence in public schools. Can you talk a little bit about what drove that legislation, the kind of vision in the longer term, and what happened this session?
Yeah, well, I can tell you what drove me. I'm a graduate from MCPS. I graduated from Montgomery Blair High School and send all three of my children to public schools. I've got two at Walter Johnson and one at North Bethesda. So public schools, runs through my blood, and I'm deeply invested not only as a legislator but also as a father. A number of years ago, we passed a revolutionary bill called the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. It's a credible piece of legislation that dramatically increases our funding in education while at the same time demanding more accountability from our system, our accountability to increase scores and outcomes and mental health in our public schools. It's a 10-year plan, and so it essentially phases in over a very long period of time, and we're starting to see results from those investments. But the plan was always to revisit parts of it, the more nuanced parts, as we go. And so we're about 3, 4, 5 years into this plan. And so we took a look at what we were doing right and where resources can be better allocated. And that's where this Excellence in Public Schools Act comes from. It's our mid-course correction to make sure we're continuing to invest in our students, in our teachers, and in accountability to get the results that we're looking for in MCPS and throughout the state.
So, Senator, I know it's a complicated formula, but Montgomery County Public Schools gets a substantial amount of money from the state.
That's right.
How is that? I know historically there have been debates about formulas and stuff. Can you explain to the residents sort of how that works? How does Montgomery County get its fair share of state money for education?
Yeah. Well, it's like anything in politics, we get it because we fight for it.
Right.
We have a great delegation to Annapolis. We've got 32 members all fighting, rowing in one direction and making sure resources come back to Montgomery County. One of the ways that resources come back to Montgomery County is because we're measuring poverty. And unfortunately in Montgomery County, we've had an increase in poverty and people in Title I schools, folks eligible for free and reduced meals. And I think, many years ago, people kind of didn't perceive that, thought Montgomery County had roads paved with gold. I think now folks realize Montgomery County is an incredibly diverse county with real needs. And so through the Montgomery County delegation, through the fights that we have on the floor and in the back rooms of Annapolis, we've been able to convince our colleagues from other counties that Montgomery County has these real needs. And therefore, we've been able to fund it.
Oh, that's good. So moving on to the question of the budget and funding, I know that there, a major budget bill that was looking at a deficit on the state level that was fairly, what was it, $1 billion?
Yeah, it was actually $3 billion, depending how you count, but yes.
Okay. And how did that all work out? I know from the municipal standpoint, from MML, it monitors and lobbies on behalf of municipalities, it was sort of neutral to municipalities, that there weren't any major cuts that create, there's a highway user revenue to the municipalities and that kind of thing. Can you give us just an overview of the budget discussions during the legislative session and how you kind of think it worked out for both municipalities and the county as well as the county?
That's right. Yeah, so you and I have been doing this a long time. I served during the Great Recession. And when we had to make cuts after the Great Recession, one of the first cuts we made was to our aid to municipal government, especially highway funds. That was a huge mistake, and it really cut municipalities' funding to the bone. And we saw the consequences of that mistake, and I was dedicated and my colleagues were dedicated not to repeat that mistake. So in fact, we did it the opposite this time. We held our municipalities harmless and make sure that they weren't, as we were cutting. And it's important that we find efficiencies and cut, and I can tell you how we did that. But we didn't want our municipalities, really the government that is closest to the people, to bear the brunt of those cuts. As you mentioned, I represent 8 municipalities. They're all run by unpaid volunteers. They do incredible work and take a lot of time to do it. And so the idea that we would hurt them in this process was anathema to me. So I'm glad we came out of this very difficult budget session by protecting our municipalities.
And I think the figure was 94% of Maryland residents really wouldn't see a tax increase in any way. That's exactly vast majority. Right. But let me ask you a counterpoint to that, to this, that is not about people in need, but the top end of the population, Maryland, from an income standpoint. There is concern, I think. I suspect that 6% was. Did they actually raise taxes on higher income? Was that part of what the solution was?
Well, only at the margins. Okay. In other words, if someone is extremely affluent, in other words, making over $400,000, right, their taxes may go up a small amount, but not on the entirety of that, only on the amount above $400,000.
Okay. Because I do know, and I know you know, that there has been concern over the years about residents retiring out of state for tax reasons. And I recall way back when I was working for a Maryland senator, U.S. senator, there was one county, Talbot County, that had the highest estate tax revenues, which is amazing because it's pretty rural. But I do hear, and I'm sure you've had people talk to you about this, that they get to the point in their career, get near retirement, and they think more about the tax environment where they're living, and a lot do leave and take a lot of wealth with them. Did that debate come up a lot in the legislature? Was there any discussion about, ensuring that people that invest and have money to invest or had businesses and made money off of businesses in Maryland don't leave the state just to protect themselves from higher state tax? Did that come up at all? So
it's a perpetual debate, and I think we need to do better in Maryland. But I also think we need to be targeted. We could try to lower taxes on retirement income broadly in Maryland, but we'll never get to zero where some other states are. And in doing so, we'd lose a lot of revenue that we dedicate to our schools and to other important services. My goal has always been to target to lower taxes, hopefully to zero, on military retirement income, so we can keep veterans who live in this state in state. Our police, firefighters,
by the way,
and teachers.
I would, on the military side, the last session we talked about this, I think last year, you raised the preference for veteran-owned small business in Maryland to 3%. From like 1 to 3, which really does help to keep the veterans in the state. So
Absolutely.
That was a good.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, listen, Maryland always wants to be a place where folks can do business, where we respect those who have been successful. We admire what they've built. But my focus has always been on the public servants, the heroes who make Maryland what it is. Oftentimes, as you know, in certain industries, they're able to retire early. In the military, firefighters, for example, we want to keep them in Maryland. And so my fight is to make sure we're lowering the cost on their retirement income so that they can stay here and continue to be members of our community.
Right. There was a bill that looked at economic development, county and municipal corporate economic development authority, and you and I've chatted about this before. I know it did not pass, but I know competitively in Montgomery County, compared to Howard and Prince George's, which are bordering, that they have more latitude to do tax increment financing for development or infrastructure around development, both residential,
Right,
I mean,
sure.
Affordable housing versus office, but and it did not pass. Do you have any background on that debate and in terms of expanding the authority to do more tax increment financing for economic development and real estate development?
Well, the core of that debate happened in a committee that I don't sit on. But what I can say is that increased flexibility for Montgomery County is a good thing.
Right.
We shouldn't get so locked into our bureaucratic processes, strong as they are, that they prevent us from doing the end policy goal that we want, which is more economic development throughout the county and also throughout our municipalities.
Right.
We're here in Kensington. We don't have enough restaurants in Kensington. We don't have enough places to hang out in Kensington, and it's doing better. And our municipal government here in Kensington, especially our mayor, have done an incredible job. But if our processes are preventing the economic development that we want and need, we have to make those processes more flexible. That's at the municipal, county, and state level.
Right. Switching just for a minute to a topic you put a lot of effort into, and the legislature was active on the environmental Chesapeake Bay side. You know, Chesapeake Bay has always been a great magnet for the state, right? Recreationally and just geographically and that kind of thing. Can you explain a little bit the results of the legislation that was passed in terms of the environment around the Bay and protection of that?
Well, this was really important, right? Because we talked about how tough it was as a budget year. And so we had to make priorities. We had to say, like, what are we going to fund and what can we hold off on? And Chesapeake Bay funding was at the top of the list, along with education, because we now have a bipartisan consensus in Maryland. Republicans and Democrats alike, liberals and conservatives alike, are all supportive of making sure we continue to invest in cleaning up the Bay. And Democrats support it because we're environmentalists and we want to make sure that we mitigate issues related to climate change. Republicans support it because they tend to represent the rural areas where the Bay is, and they've got watermen who work there, whose entire livelihood is dependent on the Bay. So even as we've had this really tough budget year, and even as we have this really destructive federal administration, we made Chesapeake Bay funding a huge priority this year, and we've seen the result of that. You probably see the Bay gets graded each and every year, and this year we've got a wonderful grade, and grasses are coming back, and oxygenated zones are coming back, oysters are coming back, and so it is
working.
It is working.
That's great.
And I hope everyone goes out this summer, go to Cantler's in Annapolis or your favorite crab house and get some oysters, order some crabs, and enjoy, because
well, I know it's been a long battle.
No question.
This dates me, but years ago I worked for a senator who established Chesapeake Bay program at EPA because of the problems. And it's fortunate that recently we're seeing, you know, improvements in the grades, the water quality and grasses and, you know, seafood and that kind of thing.
And it's not all policy. Just to give credit where credit's due, we've got an incredible cadre of scientists who are working on this issue every day, who do a wonderful job.
Right. Well, Senator, we've chatted about this before, and we have one more little area, unless you've got some others, we're not. But on the transportation side, you and I have talked a lot. We've got we've got the trust fund that has 5 modes to fund the transit, the highways, the port, the airport, and the tunnels. And it's a tough battle, right? They had a huge cut in the amount of money in the transportation fund to meet the state mobility needs, as well as support to the municipalities through some funding that they get. So how did that look at the end of the session? What's your reaction to how that came out in terms of preserving the roads? You know, you and I have chatted before about Virginia and how they have achieved through HOV lanes and tolling more capacity on the highway systems than Maryland has. I mean, I'm not a commuter from North County, but if I were, I would be very frustrated about the lack of progress on the 270 widening that we keep talking about it, but never happens, right? So what's your sense of that? How did we come out of this session in terms of addressing mobility needs and multimodal infrastructure in Maryland?
From a budget perspective, we came out at equipoise. In other words, we didn't put a lot of new investments in new projects, but we're making sure we're not doing cuts because people will really feel it when they see potholes on the roads or delays in the metro system.
Right.
And so we funded essentially a preservation of service, which is important because if government can't do basic things right, like repave roads or keep metro running on time,
right.
Then folks lose faith in government in other areas.
Right.
But let me just make a philosophical point here that I think is really important. So much of what we talk about when we talk about transportation is investment, dollars, raw dollars in our roads and in our transit system. But a lot of folks are talking a lot about processes now. And you've probably heard a lot about this new book, Abundance by Ezra Klein. And I think a lot about the abundance movement and what we need to do to build more, faster, and cheaper. And there are a lot of both Democrats and Republicans.
You mean to address infrastructure issues?
That's right.
Okay.
We cannot solve this just with dollars.
Got it.
That I think that lesson has been lost on some people in my party for too long. When you look at the high-speed rail in California, or you look at the internet infrastructure that the Biden administration tried to do, we did a great job of investing in these things, but there's nothing that's happening on the ground right now. Why is that? It's because we've built up processes that prevent us from moving quickly enough on these issues. Meanwhile, our economic competitors in China are building miles and miles of high-speed rail, of energy, and especially renewable energy. If we can't move fast enough, then we are going to fail in our competition at the international level, and other states who compete with Maryland will realize this and move faster too. So we've got to start moving faster, and we've got to start moving more cheaply in order to build the infrastructure we need in this state.
Right. Well, Senator, thank you so much for your service for District 18 and for the session and all the things that you did and accomplished. And it's been an honor to talk to you again on these issues. And thank you. Thank Channel 16 and our viewers for joining us for this great discussion. And please contact the Senator if you have any follow-up questions. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it.
Good to see you.